Keith Stubbs, comedian and owner of Wiseguys Comedy Clubs in Salt Lake, Ogden, and at Jordan Landing. Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Glad to be here.
Now, you've been doing stand-up comedy for 27 years now. You own Wiseguys with 3 locations along the Wasatch Front. How tough is comedy as a business? How difficult is it to be a successful comedian?
To be a successful comedian is really difficult. I started when I lived in Los Angeles, California, and I started doing open mic nights, which is what every comic does. You think you're funny, someone said you're funny, or somewhere you have this neuroses where you think you can do it even though you probably can't. So you go to open mic nights and you try out a joke or two, maybe you do 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, and hopefully you get a laugh. Hopefully you have a positive response from someone, somewhere. It could be one person laughing in the back. You go, ooh, I think I've got something there. So that's kind of where it starts. But to tell you the truth, there's a lot more disappointment at the beginning. You've got to really believe that you can do it to be able to gut it out. Most people try comedy and don't stick with it because it is so difficult. And some people that are determined say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make it work. It takes a lot to continue and to forge forward with it.
A lot of thick skin, I would imagine.
You know what? You should have thick skin, but most comedians I know don't have thick skin. They have the opposite. They're very sensitive. As a matter of fact, a conversation with a lot of comics a lot of times is a woe is me session. It's probably not what you think it is. It's probably more the opposite.
Jerry Seinfeld has said that writing stand-up comedy is probably the most difficult thing you could ever do in entertainment. Do you agree with him?
I think the most difficult thing for me, I can't speak for Jerry Seinfeld, but I can speak for me, was finding out who I am. And when I say that, knowing who I am on stage and who I am and being comfortable with who I am on stage. A lot of times when you first get on the stage, you're afraid of rejection. You're afraid of failure. You're afraid of not doing well. So you'll put a facade up, some kind of a facade so you can kind of get through it and not be hurt. But eventually, the more you do it and the more scenarios that you've been through, you get more comfortable. And as soon as you're more comfortable, then you're truly who you are on stage. And when you're more who you are on stage, it's easier to write. So I think it's easier to write the longer you've been in it and the more comfortable you are in stand-up comedy.
What is the key to a good joke or a good bit?
I don't think there's one formula to that, because I think there's a lot of different styles. You look at guys like Mitch Hedberg or Stephen Wright or Jerry Seinfeld. Remember Sam Kinison, who was really loud? You got Richard Pryor. So there's so many different styles. I don't think it could really be answered like that. I just think it's such an individual thing. And I think you have to resonate with the audience. And I do believe as a comedian, the audience has to like you. Even if you're a curmudgeon, even if you're negative, even if you yell, even if they don't agree with you, but if they like you, you got a better shot at getting a laugh.
It's possible to have great material and just still not be very funny. What is the difference between somebody who is really funny and someone who is not so much?
I know people that have great jokes and they can't perform their way out of a bag for whatever reason. And I think it gets back to likability, that if the audience doesn't like them or if there's not a connection with the audience, even though those jokes may be the same jokes that someone else told, it doesn't really matter. I was doing a show in Chicago years ago, and it was the night of American Idol years ago. It was a thing for Comedy Central. And I did a joke, and it died. It died a miserable death. A week later, I saw Chris Rock do the exact same joke, and it was just a coincidence, of course, and it murdered, it killed. And I'm thinking, well, why did his go so well? And at that time, it was maybe 10, 12 years ago, I wasn't, in my opinion, the comedian that I am now, and he is exceptional. He's great. So he could pull off that exact same joke, and I got nothing.
Speaking of that very thing, what do you make of David Cross's attempt at humor centered on LDS temple garments?
I think some people do things to be provocative, to shock, to get attention. And I think he did all of those things. I think he got attention, no doubt about it, at least locally. I know he got some national press, but he got a ton of local press on it. The way I see comedy is it's different strokes for different folks. If you like him, go see him. If you don't like him, don't go see him. At Wiseguys, as an owner of a venue, I'm faced with challenges every week because I want to appeal to a broad audience. So I'll bring in different comics that I may not even think are funny. I don't book to my liking all the time. It's a variety. I'll bring in high energy guys, ladies, duos, whatever it takes, just to appeal to a broad segment of the audience.
Now, you are active LDS, and you have some very funny bits about 3 hours of church and taking kids to church and other things centered on the dominant culture here in Utah.
It's miserable.
I wouldn't call it miserable. I think it's hilarious. How do you walk that fine line between being truly funny about that kind of thing and being disrespectful?
I think there is a fine line. I think you have to understand whatever the culture is. Because what I say, I mean. I do mean that 3 hours is brutal. I can't get it. But I also respect it. I'm not going to be disrespectful about it. I've done those jokes in front of crowds where there are ecclesiastical leaders. People know that these jokes are out there, and one day when it changes, because it will, because I'm right. I know I'm right. It's going to change. I hope I just get a little shout out. That's what I want at general conference. Put me on the second row and say, a little tip of the hat.
And our thanks to Keith Stubbs for giving us the idea.
The visionary. No, but I do believe that. I think you could be sensitive and aware of what other people are going through, and it could not just religion. It could be marriage. It could be suicide. It could be so many subjects that are so dark. But I think if you handle it the right way and you're aware and you're kind, I think you can still get a laugh and not alienate everyone. But I will tell you this: there are people that I know that have seen that joke that I do, and they're offended. And some people,
how could you say something?
Some people you can't win. Some people you just can't win.
At what point did you know that Wiseguys was going to work, that the club was going to be successful, and that people were going to keep coming?
Boy, that's tough, because every day I feel like I'm on the verge of going out of business. That's the honest truth. I toured the country doing stand-up, and when I was on the road, I was living in Los Angeles, and I would go up to Canada or Minnesota or New Orleans or Texas or wherever it was, and I worked various bars and honky-tonks and comedy clubs and theaters. And through all that, I saw things I liked, saw things I didn't like, and I always thought, well, you know what? If I ever opened a comedy club, I'm going to do it my way. It may not be the right way, but I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it. So when I opened the comedy club, I opened it with a Home Depot credit card, a Sam's Club credit card, and very, very little money, and hope for the best. Being in business, it is up and down. It is difficult. We went through the 2008, the recession. I'll never forget when 9/11 happened. You feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going out of business. It's over. And this is a family-owned business. This isn't owned by somebody with a bunch of money. It's me and my wife, Noelle. And Noelle runs the club in Ogden, and I spend most of my time in Salt Lake City at Jordan Landing. But to tell you the truth, you never know that it's going to continue and be successful, because every day is a new day.
There is a school of thought that says that comedians are really people who are in deep pain and have experienced emotional trauma of some kind at some point in their life. Do you believe that?
No, I've heard that. Everyone's got a neighbor that's in deep pain. Everyone's got a friend with problems. Everybody's been through something. Go through your neighborhood. If you ask questions, you'll find out that they're not much different than the comedian. Now, the comedian's different because they're not hiding it. They're putting it out there. So to me, that's the difference. The comedian will tell you what happened, that horrible thing that happened, or the episode, or how horrible they're feeling. They will tell you that. Your neighbor won't. But I truly believe that comics get a bad rap when it comes to that. A lot of people think that we're all sick puppies, but I think there's a lot of sick puppies out there.
Comedy from older, this is my observation. Okay. So comedy from older comedians seems to be like deeper and more mature. I mean, they just seem to be funnier to me, as opposed to younger comedians who haven't been down life's road all that far. Can you describe to me the difference between older comedians and younger comedians? What is the difference between those generations?
I think you just explained it. It's living life. It's having life experience. It's having been out there and been rejected and losing a job and going through a divorce and wrecking your car and going broke and having things happen in your life, deaths in your family, all these things. It's maturity. You grow up, you see things, you process things differently because you're more mature. And I believe you could take those things and make them funnier. And a new comic, you don't know how to process that. A lot of times you'll hear a new comic go, man, this thing happened to me, and I know it's funny, but I don't know how to make it funny. Well, eventually, they probably will if they stick with it. But immediately, it's very, very difficult when you're not dialed in and you don't have that experience as a veteran comic who has been out there and been on stage and knows how to relate an interesting, different, unique story to those people and still get a laugh.
There is a rhythm that comedians and audiences get into where they start laughing and the comedian just keeps going. I mean, it's like a river or like a vein of gold. And the comedian doesn't even have to say stuff that's all that funny, and the laughter just keeps rolling and rolling. How do you get to that sweet spot in the show?
That is a great thing that happens, but it doesn't happen all the time. But it's beautiful. When you get a little roll going, you've connected with the audience, your material's hitting, you've got things going, you hit them with a punchline, they laugh, you got another punchline. And like you said, it may not be nearly as funny as the audience is giving you, and that's okay. That's okay, because there's enough disappointment out there from the other side.
To make up for it.
That we'll take what we can get. But no, there's nothing like that.
Is that what keeps you going? I mean, is it the sweet spot in those shows where the laughter just continues on and on and on? Is that the cocaine for you?
I think that's part of it. I think having the positive response is always great. But if you ask any comic, they remember the stories that are dark and sad and the horrible things. I've been in so many situations where I've done shows that... You want a story?
Sure.
I'll give you a great story. I was doing a show, going to do a high school reunion in Ogden. And they asked me to go to the Marriott in Ogden right off 25th Street. And I said, yeah, I'll be there. So I went to Ogden. I was running a little bit late. So I got there and I go, I'm sorry, I'm here. They said, no problem, go ahead and go. So I grabbed the mic, and there were maybe 100 people there, and I was doing my show, and it was going great, man. I was killing. It was like, oh, I got this. So right behind me, there was this big wall, and there were pictures of different people from the high school reunion. It was like a 20-year reunion. And there were these pictures. And I'm like, oh, so where's Jenny? Where's Jenny? Is Jenny here?
No.
And I thought that these were the senior superlatives. Like, oh, hey, Jim, where's that mullet? I don't see the mullet anymore. And what it was
in
the
memoriam?
Students. Yes, and they had just done a moment of silence for these people, and I had no idea. So I continued to try to work it, and the audience, they kind of looked at me, and one guy on the front row, Bob, looked at me, and I kind of looked in his eyes, and he kind of gave me that, oh, man. And I knew, I went, oh, no. I said, I am so, so sorry. And I apologized to the audience. I said, I hadn't. And I didn't say what I knew had happened. They knew and I knew. And I said, I am so sorry. And then I tried to get him back. And I got him back, kinda. But I never got him back like I had him before. So that type of thing happens. And those are the things you remember. And everyone kills. You know, everyone has a great show.
Yeah.
But you remember those other shows. You remember the ones where it's like, oh, boy, you wouldn't believe what happened.
Who do you look up to as a comedian? Who makes you laugh?
May he rest in peace, but I loved Don Rickles. Rickles was my guy. I loved him as an actor. I loved him when he was doing the roast back in the day with Sinatra. I opened for Joan Rivers in concert, and that was an honor. She is amazing. She's a legend, and she couldn't have been sweeter. And I think it's because she loves comedy, and she loves comedians. I think she may have been, rest in peace, a curmudgeon to other people, but she was nothing but nice. But I think because we had something in common, She was a great comic, and I was a comic, not to her level by any sense. But I also love Colin Quinn. He was on Saturday Night Live for years, and he's probably living my favorite comic.
Here in Utah, there is a significant demand for clean comedy. Now, from where you sit, elsewhere around the country, and you've been on tour all over the country, do you think comedy is becoming more clean, staying about the same, or is it getting more coarse?
I think it depends on who you are and what you like. I think there's some people that prefer clean comedy only, and they're not open to anything else, and that's fine. I will say this. The way things are these days politically, I think there's a lot of divisiveness out there. I think the audiences are different than they were before, because I've been in it for a long time, and there seems to be a weird tension in the audience. It depends on what side of the fight you're on, if you're on the left or if you're on the right. There are audience members that seem a little more combative, a little more fired up, a little more emotional than they used to be. As far as me, I prefer just funny. I do comedy the way I want to do comedy, but I think there's a huge demand for it. And I think it's an underserved part of the comedy world out there. I think that a lot of the networks that are out there that put comedy out, the big providers of comedy, I think they pretty much ignored a large segment of that. And all you have to do is look at the success of Brian Regan and Jerry Seinfeld and Jim Gaffigan and others, and Ryan Hamilton, who started at Wiseguys, who's performing at Kingsbury Hall next month, and it's sold out. There is an appetite for that type of comedy. Now, that being said, different strokes for different folks. You can do whatever you want, but I believe that the appetite has probably always been there. I just think it's been underserved.
At Wiseguys, I notice on your website you have a rating. Like, you know, this comic is R-rated.
Right.
This comic is PG-rated or
Right.
PG through, well, whatever it is. Which of those shows are more successful?
I think it depends on who it is. I've had Kevin Hart at Wiseguys. I've had George Lopez at Wiseguys. I've had Kevin Nealon, David Spade, Rob Schneider, just a lot of legendary comics. And I think it's fame. Fame. I've had Steve-O at Wiseguys. So I've had a different level of, I don't know how I'd phrase it. The ratings would be definitely different. I think it depends on the fame. I don't think it really matters if someone is clean or dirty in the eyes of a lot of the audience members. They're going, oh, I remember that guy from Deuce Bigalow. I know the guy from that movie.
Yeah. You and I were raised on Milton Berle and Sid Caesar and Phyllis Diller and Jimmy Durante and Johnny Carson and all these, you know, long time ago comics.
Right.
Have the principles of comedy changed over time, or are they about the same?
I think it's changed. I think it's changed a lot. I think back in the day, a long time ago, I think a lot of the comedians just had their act, but a lot of them didn't talk much about themselves. They didn't talk a ton about social issues. There wasn't a lot of that. I think that changed a lot with George Carlin and some of the other ones. I'm sure I'm missing other people that are going to tweet and say, what about whoever?
Yeah.
But that's fine. But no, I believe it has changed. I think it's become more personal, more autobiographical, more opinionated than it used to be back in those days. Especially if you look back in the Catskill days or the Laurel and Hardy days. I mean, that's just forever ago. But that was a different style of comedy entirely.
Politics in comedy is a very tender place to go. I mean, that is fraught with as a minefield would be. What is the key to being politically funny and not stepping on toes in your audience?
I think anytime you're political, especially now, you're going to step on toes. There are people that can do jokes that are political and still get a good response. I believe if they're even-handed, they have a better shot at getting a response. But I feel like if they have an agenda, they're out to get someone, they haven't really maybe even thought through their joke entirely, they're looking at one side, then I think that you have a chance to alienate that audience, and I think that you're not going to get the laugh that you would probably get. George Lopez was at Wiseguys recently, and he makes no apologies about his politics. But I will tell you, I saw 4 shows that he did. He talked about the political situation a little bit, and I believe it was even-handed. I saw it live. I believe it was even-handed, and I thought it was funny. There are people that are, like I said before, hypersensitive about everything. about everything, no matter which side you're on. People are ready to throw someone under the bus. And I do believe it's different now than it has been in the past. But I think being even-handed with your joke is probably more important.
You have had a lot of comedians come through Wiseguys over the years. As you look back over the history of your business and your establishment, Wiseguys, which act stands out in your memory the most?
Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart, no doubt about it. I got a phone call. Kevin Hart wants to come to Wiseguys to work on new material. That's flattering. That's pretty huge. Now, this is before he was selling out football stadiums, but he was already selling out big theaters, so he was already doing very well. So to have a guy like Kevin Hart at Wiseguys working on material, videotaping every one of his shows, and having someone in the back writing notes as he was performing, as he's working through new material, that's pretty exciting, and he couldn't have been nicer.
Look into your crystal ball and tell me where the comedy industry is headed. Are we headed into a richer time? Are we headed into a leaner time? Are there more comics coming through, and are they funnier?
There are a lot of great comics out there right now, and I think a lot of the comics that are the funniest, in my opinion, are a lot of the comics you've never heard of. There are so many talented comics that are on the road. They're going to a gig in Missoula, then they go to Fargo, North Dakota, then they go to Leavenworth, Kansas, and they just, for whatever reason, haven't resonated or become famous or gotten lucky, and those are some of the funniest people out there. I think comedy's in a great way right now, other than, I believe, the hypersensitivity on pretty much all sides when it comes to politics.
Well, Keith Stubbs, comedian, owner of Wiseguys in Salt Lake, Ogden, and at Jordan Landing, thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Thank you so much, Bob.